Thanks, Madam Chairperson. Thanks to IDSA for this great opportunity, and particularly so because they often allow me to float with rambling thoughts. Whatever I say, they somehow tolerate it. The subject given to us is stability and growth. And to begin with, I was wondering, why not stability and development? Because growth is one component of development, that too confined to the economic aspect. And when we look at South Asia, we find various permutations and combinations on the idea of what development could be. Bhutan, for instance, talks about happiness, not the GNP or GDP. They talk about the national happiness. Gandhi talked about spiritual development rather than material development. So these ideas being so diverse and disparate, I wish we could encompass them under the title of development, where material aspect is just one of the components. When we look at these two terms, growth and stability, I think we also need to be very clear what we mean while we are making an argument. Stability is not just the opposite of change or difference. In fact, stability encompasses very orderly change. But the question arises, when we are talking of stability, stability of what? Of political order, of ruling regime, social systems, cultural context, economic system, or what really? So I think we have to be very clear as to what we are linking with the concept of growth or development. Growth is generally meant in economic terms, but it is not necessary that growth would deliver you development on other counts or other fronts. Look at the Bangladesh situation today. I think one of the latest article in probably Economist says that Bangladesh has registered much better human development index than economic growth. And it is not necessary that if you are economically growing, your social and political dimensions would be equally reassuring. Now, political stability and economic growth, to my mind, have a very complex nexus. Because the minister said stability is a necessary precondition to development. But stability does not necessarily deliver either growth or development. And there are several examples of this. So it has both the positive relationship as also a negative relationship. Generally, we assume the positive relationship, which is of course correct in many ways, but there are also negative aspects. And negatively, if there is instability, I have said, in fact, in my abstract, I wrote 5 Ds and counted them at 4. But I said there are 5 Ds which are affected if you don't have political stability. It disrupts economic activity. It disturbs social peace and order, delays policy decisions and priorities and their implementations, distorts priorities and growth vision of the countries, and deters investments, resource mobilization, and external support. So it hampers growth in many ways. But as I mentioned, the stability is neither essential nor adequate condition for growth. Take the Sri Lankan example. There are many examples one can take. Take Nehru's India. We had Hindu rate of growth. 11 to 15 years of quite a stable political regime, but did not deliver the growth to you. Take Sri Lankan example. Even during the conflict, they had a very impressive 5 to 6% or maybe more percent of the growth, largely because the sectors of economic activity like estate, manufacturing of the garments, and tourism were almost insulated from the areas of conflict, and they grew. And for the last 3 years, they have seen prime of stability. After terrorism out, the growth has come down. So I mean, this is a riddle which we may have to solve it. The kings Nepal, for instance, Gyanendra, Mahendra, all stability, no growth. So it's not necessary that stability would deliver growth to us, but we need to look at that. In fact, there are scholars and analysts who have argued that sometimes conflict, turbulence, and instability trigger drivers of growth like national resolve, dynamic and new leadership, radical policy measures, which really feed into the. So this is a kind of a complex and multiple relationship between the two concepts which we are talking about. Now, our session is on political stability, and let me run through some of the flags, some of the points there. We have seen in South Asia a democratic resurgence for the past decade. I think many countries earlier, both monarchies and military regimes were folded out, and democratic systems came. And there was a huge upsurge of hope and expectations that now we will see not only stable political orders, but also economic and developmental progress. Somehow it has not taken place. There were even two major insurgencies which were put out, Sri Lanka by one way, Nepal by another way. And the hope generated was really so much that a lot of 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 4-5 years were very, very hopeful. But somehow the promise of stability under democratic resurgence has been belied. And it has been belied on three counts. The national consensus which brought about democratic resurgence has been fractured. The leadership promise which came out of the democratic resurgence has been is now being questioned, and the institutional credibility which was expected, constitutions would be written down, there would be new institutions, new forms, have not really come up. Now, this broad national political consensus which drove the democratic resurgence today stands almost completely eroded, certainly in Nepal, in Pakistan, in Maldives, also to some extent I would say in Bangladesh. Sri Lanka has missed the opportunity after suppressing or repressing terrorism and eliminating it to really evolve a solution for the ethnic problem. Therefore, the roots of the problem still continue to be there. India, I mean a robust democracy for that matter, where the fragility of coalition culture has totally been exposed in terms of what nationally one needs to be doing, and there is a serious erosion of the leadership credibility because of the corruption issues which have come up. Not that there are not these issues elsewhere, corruptions and others. So you see a problem where the source of hopes which arose is no longer valid, and many of these countries would be going in for elections. Let us hope that the elections yield stable governments, and somehow something happens which is hopeful. Afghanistan, the minister mentioned it, DG Dr. Gupta mentioned it in the morning, is in a span of total uncertainty. And not only total uncertainty for Afghanistan, but what happens in Afghanistan is going to spill over the entire region and disturb it in one way or the other. The international support, which earlier stood for democratization process, has thinned down, if at all not totally disappeared. I can go case by case, but this is what the effect is, and following the chairman's guideline not to elaborate upon it. In fact, General Kayani in Pakistan, yesterday or day before, came out with a statement saying that none of the institutions can deliver the kind of peace and prosperity which you are expecting in Pakistan. And he mentioned even about army, he was saying a lot of them are being taken to the court. There is a serious erosion of the credibility of the army since Osama operations. But whatever, I think the institutions which earlier looked to be very strong, very resilient, which could cope with the pressures of change, are no longer there. And that, I think, has dimmed the prospects of region's economic growth and prosperity. In fact, we have a full session on economic growth, and I would very carefully look into those papers and the presentations to see how many times political stability is considered as a basic necessity for economic growth. I think most of the papers would be talking about the infrastructure, labor, other prospects which happen rather than going into any of the political dimensions of the whole question. But let us look at that. And because of this problem, there are efforts in some of the countries to get out of this rut of the locking between stability and growth. India's reform package, in fact, most of them are now leaning on the international or outside system reform package. Bangladesh trying to bring in World Bank back, the Padma Bridge crisis which took place. Pakistan, thanks heaven, have opened trade and economic relations with Pakistan, with India, to take care of the internal economic growth problem. But international situation itself is not very, very encouraging. And that brings me to the last point. Can regional cooperation be an answer to that? I think regional cooperation situation has improved very considerably. But I am still not sure if SAARC can ever be a panacea for South Asian prosperity as such. It can be a very vital, very important factor, but not the total answer to that. And I find that with the kind of international situation changing in Asia-Pacific region, probably there would be more divisive forces being injected by international competition on South Asian strategic space than what we have seen earlier. And lastly, the questionable end game in Afghanistan will bring what to us, we just do not know. I think within these prospects, I find I am the one who has to conclude on a pessimistic note, where I find that neither the situation on political stability is very assuring, nor the prospects of growth are very bright. Thank you very much.